If you are on the terrestrial band today, welcome to 102.9 FM KPOG. Perhaps you're listening online at TuneIn. That's the name of the source in which you can always reach KPOG, either with your Android or with your Apple device. TuneIn, it is a free app that you'll get on your app store, and you're never without the wonderful teachings, preachings, music, entertainment, health advice, and fun of KPOG, the power of God. My name's J. Michael McCoy. I am on the radio Monday through Friday from 10 to 11 a.m. My old cohort, my old partner in crime, Frank the Verse Thomas, hosts the show The View from a Pew every afternoon from 4 to 6, and I would invite you to listen to that show and check him out. Very pompous, very arrogant, but loves Jesus. So you can't beat that. Yesterday, how about yesterday, huh? If you were listening to the show, you know that we lost our power here. Oh, I suppose it was about 9:45. It was that moment in which it was darker outside than it even is at midnight, because there was no sun and there was no moon. And we are now picking up the debris and putting back together our neighborhoods. 110-mile-an-hour hurricane winds. Now, when I first heard somebody use the term hurricane, I thought, well, that's not the right word to use. It's not hurricane. It's tornado. But apparently, the proper term is hurricane force winds. Hurricane gale force winds, I guess, is the actual true thing that you want to call it. And so I posted a few videos as I drove around a little bit yesterday looking at some of the damage. Most of the damage was physical damage, was to a few. The Buccaneers Arena, it lost its roof, and a lot of rain damage on the inside. Question whether that facility will be able to be rebuilt or fixed, or just torn down and build a new one. Also, trees down all over the place. Marshalltown is currently at 98% without power. And there are hundreds of thousands of people without power across the state of Iowa. At one time yesterday, it was 250,000 customers. 250,000 customers. That's like 10% of the population in the state of Iowa had no power. Crews are going to be out today. Make sure that if your crews or if the crews are out, you know, take them a case of water, or, you know, make a cake and take them some cake, or, you know, whatever they need. You need to use the bathroom or something. These guys, they're trained to do this. This is go time, and believe me, they feel the pressure that we want our power back on. I got an email this morning from my cell phone provider that I went over the max on minutes, or not minutes, on data, because I had no Wi-Fi at home. I still don't have power at my house. I got up this morning a little after 4. I didn't mean to get up that early, just didn't sleep very well, and decided I would just come over to the studio. So I was here at the studio by 5 and putting everything together for the show today, and don't know what I'll do the rest of the day. Got to find something to do. I suppose I could just go work in my yard. That's what I may do. Thought it was interesting. It was cooler outside this morning at 5 o'clock than it was inside my house. Now, the temperatures are going to go back up, so I didn't open windows or anything like that, but My, oh my, how the times they are changing. And I got to change with them. How about you? All right, I'm going to read Jesus Calling for this morning. I forgot all about it yesterday. I'm going to read it for this morning, and then we're going to talk about, when you mix politics and religion, all you get is politics. And I don't want to talk politics today, but I think it's important that we have a conversation about religious freedoms. And I must admit that I am doing that topic today because I believe that our religious freedoms have never been at greater risk than they are with this election. And I get so tired of people telling me, well, this is the most important election we've ever had. Yeah, well, didn't they say that 4 years ago, and then 4 years before that, and then well, it seems like every year we say that. But when you look at religious freedoms in America, which should be synonymous, they should go hand in hand, brother and sister, kissing cousins, related. Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and God. It should all be just together, religious and freedom. You remember why we founded this country? You remember why? Well, I'll go into that in a little bit. I don't want to get into that speech yet. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And if I get too political, I want you to jump on the Facebook or text me or something and tell me I went too far down the road, because I'm real passionate about this. And I'm not passionate about it for my lifetime. I'm passionate about it for my great-grandson, Isaiah's lifetime. Because my grandkids, they know what religious freedom is. But Isaiah doesn't have any idea of what's available to him right now. And that may be gone, depending on what the outcome of this election is. So we'll talk about that. All right, here is Jesus Calling for August 11th, 2020. Come to me. Come to me. Come to me. This is my continual invitation to you, proclaimed in holy whispers. When your heart and mind are quiet, you can hear me inviting you to draw near. Coming close to me requires no great effort on your part. It is more like ceasing to resist the magnetic pull of my love. Open yourself to my loving presence so that I may fill you with my fullness. I want you to experience how wide and how long and how high and how deep is my love for you, so that you can know my love that surpasses all knowledge. The vast ocean of love cannot be measured or explained. Not the one I have for you, but it can be experienced. Amen. So many moons ago, probably a half a millennial, there was a king. His name was Henry VIII. You know the song. I'm Henry VIII, I am. Henry VIII, I am. I got married to the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before, and everyone was a Henry. Da-da-da-da-dum. Well, although it wasn't the official Church of England, the Catholic Church in the mid-19th century, the 1500s, no, that would have been the 20th century. No, that would have been the 18th century. We're in the 21st century now, right? So in the 20s. So that would have been the 20th century. In the mid-1500s, around that area. Good morning, Les. How are you? And Brad says, be careful talking history because I'm listening, brother. Yeah, Brad Sand is really good at history. So you correct anything I say, General Sand. So once a long time ago, Henry VIII, which was, he was quite the ladies' man. He had many wives, some all at once, some at different times. And he decided that he wanted to get a divorce and get married again, so he went to the Pope because, you know, I'm Henry VIII. I've got access to the Pope. And told the Pope that he wanted him to grant him a divorce from his current wife so he could marry his next wife. And the Pope said no. I have a joke on the end of my tongue, but I'm not going to say it. I thought about it, but I'm not. And so Henry VIII, being the king, because as John Goodman said one time in one of my favorite movies, it's good to be the king. He decided that he would start his own denomination of Christianity. Brad just said Henry VIII never had more than one at a time. All were either divorced or dead before he remarried. Yeah, I bet the death was convenience. That'd be on a Unsolved Mysteries on A&E. And so Henry VIII started the Church of England. And its hierarchy was determined in a theological term called Episcopal. And the Episcopal is where you don't have a pope, you have a bishop, and you have a president, or you have a something else that runs the denomination, but you don't have a pope. And the Pope has great power in the Catholic Church. He wields all the power. But in the Episcopal hierarchy, the hierarchy is done basically by districts, by states, by regions. I think it was the Nebraska, Iowa Episcopal region right now that we live in, if you're an Episcopalian. And so the Church of England was started, and it was called the Episcopal Church. And then Henry VIII could divorce and find his other wives dead as often as he wanted. And before we knew it, those folks that lived in England, many were called the Puritans. They were the forefathers to the Amish, to the Quakers. They could not deal with the king having his own church because the king was the king. It's good to be the king. And he was mandating, making laws. At that time, there was no parliament. There was no, the king was the king. The king had all the horses and all the king's men. Forget about Humpty Dumpty. They could have put him back together again. Yeah, I know. Silly today. And so these people wanted to escape what they felt was persecution. They were told how to worship, and it was a state church, and whatever the laws that Henry VIII wanted when it came to church or religion or faith, he could just pass those laws like he wanted to. Excuse me. And I don't know, maybe Brad could help us out, but I don't know what other persecutions that they were facing. But they had an official religion for the country and the king. And at some point or another, I would imagine that they missed their Catholicism, because even though the Pope was the master, Catholicism was never the religion of the state. It was just an incredibly powerful denomination, believed by many to be founded by Peter, as in the disciple Peter, the apostle Peter, only because Jesus at one time said that, Peter, upon you I will build my church. You are the rock. Upon your rock I will build my church. And it's believed that Peter was the first pope, and there are people who will argue with that. I'm sure Brad's going to say something. But either way, the Catholicism and the Catholic Church was the basically only denomination of Christianity. In fact, there were no denominations of Christianity. Well, I guess you could call the Mennonites and the Quakers and the Amish having their own denomination, but basically that's really not the way it was. Brad just said before, Luther's break from the church, all Western states were Catholic. Yeah. And I want you to imagine that coming across the Atlantic Ocean, and it's cold. You know, the Pacific stays pretty warm, but the Atlantic Ocean was cold. And these were just wooden ships with sails. And pirates were as common as, you know, carjackers and thieves and bank robbers. It was hard to get across the Atlantic Ocean. But yet, these Puritans, these Amish, these Quakers, some Episcopalians, but not a lot. A few Catholics, I'm sure, but for the most part, that was it. Luther had not yet staked his name on the denomination of being Lutheran. I don't even know if Luther would be happy about anybody calling a denomination outside of Catholicism after him the Lutheran Church. That's where that comes from, Martin Luther. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't think Martin Luther King. Just stop at Martin Luther. He was a Catholic priest who had enough of penance and forgiveness and confession and purgatory and all these other things that Catholicism was accused, I'm going to just say accused because I don't want to get into that conversation, accused of doing, which were not biblical. But when you're the Pope, it's good to be the Pope. And so they made their own rules and they did their own thing. And when Martin Luther posted his theses on the door of the Catholic Church and said, this is enough's enough, we're not going to do this anymore. And then we began to get denominations, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, etc. There were a lot of Englanders, Spaniards, that just didn't want to have anything to do with it. They wanted freedom to worship as they chose, not as the state chose. They wanted a freedom for their religion to worship who they wanted to, when they wanted to, how they wanted to. And that's a nice little speech, and you know, nowadays it'd be a march down Grand Avenue in Des Moines with signs and masks, and not a lot of masks. Very little social distancing. But back then you couldn't do that. I mean, you'd be killed, you'd disappear. Whoops, what happened to Bob? I don't know, he was standing there a minute ago. Ooh, maybe it's the one was taken and one was stayed, lost again. No, I don't think so. Brad says Luther was looking to reform from within, but the powers that would be did not want to give up their power. And so, as the story goes, they rented the boats. Christopher Columbus had come over first in 1492 and got word back that, hey, there's a big piece of land over here. It's called the Americas. We're not sure how big it is yet because we can't get across it. But you guys ought to come over here and join us. And so they did, by the drove. And the first American was settled and founded on the East Coast there in the Boston area. And I just want you to grasp for a moment the heartache and hardship that these people took on to come over to America to gain freedom from their government suppressing their religion. It must have been a horrible, horrible, oppressing thing. Because you don't just do what they did as lightly as they did, so you wouldn't have to listen to the Pope anymore. I mean, I don't think so. But the bottom line was that they came over because they wanted freedom of religion. And some yabba-dabba-doo jackrabbit decided that that should be called freedom from religion. It's not in print that way anywhere. It's nowhere in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights that you should have freedom of or freedom from religion. It's freedom of religion. The forefathers who set up the charter, the documentation, the Bill of Rights, the Letter of Independence, all those things that we learned when we were kids in school, all they wanted was the right to worship who they wanted to, when they wanted to, how they wanted to, where they wanted to, and if they didn't want to at all, then nobody was going to tell them they had to. You could be atheist. You could be agnostic. It didn't matter to the folks that came over on those boats and tried desperately to build a new country. And little did they know the grand old gal that we would build would be the greatest superpower in the history of the world. And for many, 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 many moons, stood on the original principles of their founders, and that was freedom of religion. And then somewhere in the mid-1800s, America started this thing called, well, I'm sorry, let me back up. America got involved in something that was going on in other places in the world called slavery. And even though slaves were common throughout the western United States, you got to remember, I don't even think we were in California yet. I mean, the West had not been won by the time the Civil War started in 1812, or whenever it was. Brad, when did the Civil War start? But the idea from some of the Puritans, the Mennonites, even the Methodists, Episcopalians, Catholics, this idea of slavery, that this isn't what Jesus meant when he talked about slavery in the Bible. Whether you're aware of this or not, I was shocked when I first found this out a few years ago, but the slaves were never treated poorly until the South got involved. The butlers and maids and waitresses and waiters who the rich had to take care of them were treated like family. Most slaves were up until that point. You know, we know about how the Israelites were sold into slavery by the Egyptians and sent over to Egypt to build the pyramids and everything else they wanted. Slaves were not indentured service people. When the Bible talks about slaves, they're talking about the middle class. They're talking about working people. Talking about people whose work was compensated for, whose family was taken care of, and who most of them said, yeah, I'm all right with this. I love my job. I'm a slave. But it didn't mean what you and I think it meant. It meant I was spoken for, that I was employed. If you were a slave, it was a good thing. Now, I understand that we twisted and turned that to the point where very few would ever agree that slavery is a good word. But there was a time when slave was just a servant, an employee, a factory worker, a guy flipping burgers at McDonald's. Being a slave just meant that you had income and that you were employed and that you were guaranteed a certain amount of money for your employment. And usually you were provided with housing and the kids were provided with school. But there were people in the North who didn't like the way the slaves were being treated in the South. A lot of plantations, a lot of farms, a lot of labor that the North thought was abusive. And they stood up. The churches stood up. The politicians stood up. The Episcopalians stood up. The Lutherans stood up. Everybody stood up and said, whoa, 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 wait a minute. This is getting out of hand. We hear that some of these people are being beaten and whipped, and they're not paid their fair share, and their families are not being taken care of. What's going on down there? And the South just had a different idea of how to treat their slaves. And I'm going to say something here that somebody's not going to like, and I ask for your permission to tell you something you don't want to hear. And since you can't tell me no, I'm sorry, since you're not able to tell me no, you don't want to hear it, to make sure you're not offended, I would encourage you to tune out now. Shut off the radio. Turn someplace else. Because what I'm about to say you're not going to like. But it's the truth. It's the God's honest truth. The type of people that were abusing their slaves, who gave slavery a bad name, who caused the North to stand up and say, no, 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 not under these broad stripes and bright stars. Not in these United States, you're not going to. The people opposed slavery eventually became the party of Lincoln, which was called the Whigs. And then eventually, it would be called, the opposition, would be called the Democrats. Hold on a minute. Brian, can you hear me? Somebody was calling in on the emergency line, but I didn't get to it fast enough. I wonder if there's something wrong with the radio. Anyway, the thing that some people don't want to hear, but it's the truth. It's recorded in the history books. That's why some people want to change the history books, because they don't like what it says. Some people want to tear down statues because they don't like what they stood for. But you can't change history. You can't change something that was or is. You can make it so it's not a part of today's society, but you can't wipe it from the map. You can't get rid of the truth. You can't decide that the truth will now be overlooked because we don't want to talk about it anymore. You just can't do that. And that's what they're trying to do nowadays. They're trying to change history. And I clearly don't understand why they want to do that. Wait, back up. I do know why they want to do that. Because it makes them look bad. The Confederate flag reminds them that at one time or another we weren't a very nice nation when it came to slaves.
Tuberculosis worsened. It was a terrible...
What's going on here?
with chills and fever.
Hold on. Pause for the cause. I'll be right back.
Hello?
What's going on?
Like studio?
Yeah, I'm in the studio. I'm doing my show.
Oh, well, go ahead and do it again. I called and nobody answered.
Well, I couldn't get to it in time. Remember, I don't have breaks, so yeah.
No, you're not going out. You're not going out over the app or anything. So I've been trying to figure out if you're out.
No, I'm live on Facebook. I don't know why I'm not on the app. That's probably on Bob's end, I think. I don't know.
It's everywhere that needs unmuted and stuff.
Huh?
Is your site unmuted so that we could hear you, or?
No, I'm on the air. I'm talking. I'm getting responses on Facebook. People are talking to me.
Okay. Like, I had to check if you're there, and I figured, oh, it needs to be that site. I want to get something playing. All right. So she'll go back. We'll just do programming on.
All right. I'll hit the mute on this thing.
Yep.
All right. Sorry about that. We are having some technical difficulties based on the storms from yesterday, and thanks for hanging on for a few seconds till we could get back to you. Where was I? Oh, I remember. I was waiting for Brad to tell me that I was doing something wrong when it came to history. 1861 was when the Civil War started. And don't forget the Quakers. He said they were the cornerstone of the movement. That's right. The Quakers, the Mennonites, those people were the cornerstone of the movement to move from England and Spain to America. And then as slavery became fairly barbaric, quite frankly, slaves were not treated kindly. They were not treated as an equal person. In fact, I think one of the most embarrassing things Americans ever did when we put the Bill of Rights together, we said that because of the color of your skin, you were 7/8 of a person. I don't know how. I want to meet the bozo that said that'd be a good idea to put in the Bill of Rights. I don't understand how you look at someone because of gender, which we did, or color of skin, which we did, and say that you're less. That is the thing that I think saddens me the most about the current social justice movement in our country, because it's really not based on today. it's really based on yesterday. I don't know how somebody can say that I owe them money because of something my great-grandfather did. I mean, if that's going to be the case, I'm Irish and German. Boy, do you guys owe me some money. Oh, and by the way, let's not forget the Native Americans who really were here first. Let's break out the barriers, tear down the walls, and go back into these reservations and give these American Indians their land back. I mean, if we're really going to do that, if you're really going to say that lives matter, don't forget. Don't forget. But I digress. 24 minutes before the top of the hour, 10:36, 11th day of August in the Lord's year 2020. I'm J. Michael McCoy, and we're talking about religious freedoms. I'm getting to where we're getting current. We as a country have always, what's the term? Idolized rebellion? We've always said that if we want change, we're willing to fight for it. Remember in the old movies how they used to line up in a straight line, the armies would, with the guns out, and they'd say charge, and they'd march forward, one by one, the enemy and the good guys, the white, the black, the red, the yellow, it didn't matter. And that's how they'd fight a war. And it literally was the last man standing, got to take the flag and go home. And then Americans decided they were going to fight differently in the Civil War. They weren't going to stand in a line and walk across the field, the battlefield, and just start shooting. They were going to hide in trees. They were going to do things that had never been done before. And the enemy called it terrorism. And thus, Americans became the first terrorists. That's probably enough of a history lesson for the day. I hope you don't mind. But I'm trying to explain that this country has always fought. The men and women of this country have always fought for the right to live free. To live free from slavery. To live free from oppression because of your gender or the color of your skin. To live free as a Lutheran or a Quaker or a Seventh-day Adventist or even as a Catholic. And today, that is being threatened more than ever. And they're sneaking in the back door. And whoever it is that's supposed to stand up for our religious rights are sleeping on the job. Are we supposed to leave it to our pastors? Are we supposed to leave it to our senators? Who are we supposed to leave it to? Who should stand up and say, no more? You know, you're not going to take this gun from my hands. You're not going to take these Bibles from my hands. You're not even going to get close to removing Jesus from my heart. But yet we have the right to assemble. We have the right to worship as we choose. Now I always get some jackrabbit that likes to tell me, well, you know, if you guys would start paying taxes on your buildings and your churches, then that'd be a lot better. You know, we'd have a better time with you then. Please? I don't know if you know that we feel this way. Please make us pay taxes. Please. Please give us taxation so then we can have, yeah, you know what I'm going to say, representation. Because that's one of the things that they glorified in 1776, the fact that you can't have taxation without representation. And if you give us representation in the government, if you actually allow us to make, you ready? Told you weren't going to like this. If you actually have the Christian party, if you actually allow religion and the state to mix again, well, there's a lot of us that wouldn't mind that a bit. You get us together and we can be public about it. And we can pass the laws that we want to protect our religion. Oh, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, what about the other religions? Don't they get representation? Yeah. Tax them. There are many who believe that there are other religions in this country that get far, far greater representation than the Christians do. And I'm not a big poll guy. You know, polls, they're just not that big a deal to me. But let me share some statistics on polls with you. This poll was taken by the Chicago Divinity School, the University of Chicago, the Associated Press, and the Center for Public Affairs and Research. Three pretty good, mainline, above the board, honest organizations, unlike most I know, who put out polls. The principle of religious freedom is important to most Americans, the press release reads. But as President Donald Trump touts his support for it during his re-election bid, there are notable fault lines among people of different faiths and political ideologies over what it truly means, religious freedom. Now, here's some figures. And I don't like figures because figures get lost in my head. So I'll try to give you as few as I can, and I'll go slow because I don't understand them, let alone I don't know how you're going to. But let's go slow. About 8 in 10, so 80 out of 100 Americans, that's 80%. That's a lot. Said religious freedom issues are at least somewhat important to them. 55% saying they were very important. That's in this poll conducted by the University of Chicago Divinity School and the Associated Press and the Center for Public Affairs Research. This poll was taken in June. So you've got 8 in 10 say that religious freedoms are somewhat important, and you've got over half, 55%, saying they're very important. Now 35%, so basically 3.5 out of 10, of U.S. adults overall say they believe their own religious freedom is threatened, at least somewhat. Wow. Conservatives, were more likely than liberals to say so. Well, of course, most liberals don't have a religion. They don't have a faith. And if that's offensive to you, then stop supporting abortion. A Across the largest U.S. religious denominations, which are evangelical Protestants, they were especially likely to perceive risks of their freedom to worship. This has never become so clearer than 2 weeks ago, when the government said churches cannot break social distancing laws. You cannot gather as a church without being 6 foot apart, wearing masks, gloves, no singing. And I get it. I get it. I understand. And there are all kinds of people yelling all kinds of baloney about, I don't want to wear a mask, it's against my freedoms. Well, do you wear a seatbelt? Do you strap your kid or your grandkid in the car seat? When it's a little warm outside, you just go take off all your clothes and run down the street naked? No. The government has every right to put restraints, guidelines, boundaries, borders on their citizens to keep the most safe for the cause of the least. To quote my favorite television star, Mr. Spock, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Let's go back to that poll. A divide over religious freedom for Muslims was particularly apparent in the poll. About half of Americans said U.S. Muslims' freedom to worship is threatened, at least somewhat, including 7 in 10 atheists and agnostics, about 6 in 10 Catholics, and about half of white mainline or non-white Protestant churches. Only about 3 in 10 white evangelicals, however, said Muslim Americans' religious freedom they think is at least somewhat threatened. See, because the challenge that we have with religious freedom is, if I give it to you, don't I have to give it to everybody else? No, you don't. Last July 1st, just a little over 5 weeks ago, the governor of the state of Iowa decided that at 18 you could no longer choose to smoke. And so they raised the tobacco purchase law, the vape purchase laws, the chewing tobacco laws, to now say you've got to be 21 and over to buy that product. And I know what you're going to argue with me. You're going to say, well, Mac, those are the kids. We got to take care of the kids because they can't take care of themselves yet. They're not old enough to make their own decisions. For God's sakes, then don't give them a gun and send them off to war at 18, please. Don't let them get married before they're 21. Then make marriage a 21 or over. I mean, if I'm being somewhat tongue-in-cheek here, because if we're going to say a person at 18 years old cannot be responsible for the decisions they make for their own lives, such as tobacco, alcohol, then you're going to have to watch that slippery slope, because that's a little hypocrisy right there. The government can take my son or daughter, put them through basic training, send them off to Afghanistan, and if they get their leg blown off, so what? If they get their eyes blown out, so what? If they die, well, thanks, you're a hero. But by God, don't give them a Camel. Don't give them a Winston. Don't give them Marlboro Black. Don't give them a vape. Don't let them have any Copenhagen. because they're not old enough to make that decision for themselves yet, because that involves life or death, man. When the kid starts smoking at 18, he could be dead by the time he's 40 from lung cancer or gum cancer or mouth cancer or throat cancer or whatever. Of course, if you send them to Afghanistan, they could be dead before they're 19. We've got to be careful, very careful, at messing with religious freedoms. I've got a radio program every day from 10 to 11, and I thank you for listening. I appreciate you listening. Whether there's 1 or 1 million, I appreciate you being here. So I have a platform to speak my mind on religious freedoms. Most people don't have that. And for some reason, there's a thing called Christian nice, kind of like there is Iowa nice. And most Christians just aren't going to stand up and yell foul when you start messing with their religious freedoms. Because they say, well, we can go home and we can study our Bible in the privacy of our homes. They can't come into our homes and take them. Can they? And if I want to believe in God, I can wear it on my shoulder in a tattoo or around my neck as a cross, or I can just wear it on my sleeve and be a born-again Jesus freak. And there's nothing you can say about it. Yeah, there is, because it's the government. And I'm very thankful for the government. Most of the time. See, I don't stand up and yell when these folks over here lose their rights. I don't yip and holler over here when these folks lose their rights. And even those yahoos over there, the ones I really disagree with, I don't really raise a stink when they lose their rights. But now you want to step into me, my life, to take my right to say Father God out loud? You want to tell me that this is the thing that really gets me, that when I quote the Bible, it's hate speech. But a candidate for the President of the United States can say, I'm only going to choose someone by the color of their skin and their gender. And you're telling me that when I read God's holy word that's been around for 6,000 years or longer or shorter, but we're in the ballpark there, that's hate speech? You deem it hate speech? You're going to legislate my religion, my book, my holy book, the Word of God, the story of the planet, the world, how it started, how it was created. You're going to tell me that's hate speech. But a man with a color in his skin can say to another man with color in his skin a word that starts with the letter N, and it's okay. But if I say it, it's hate speech. We're getting all messed up here, folks. We forgot what this country was founded on. The freedom of. The freedom to gather and march down the street peacefully. That's what America is. The freedom to open a book, and no matter what it has in it, there's a freedom of the press. There's a freedom of publishing what I think. And there's laws set up that if I say something wrong, if I put somebody down too bad, if I hurt their business, they can sue me. And that's okay. But for the government to step in and say no, if you say that word to somebody, it's hate speech, but if somebody else says it, because their skin color is different than mine. Oh my gosh, isn't that racism? Allowing something or not allowing something based on the color of your skin, or even worse, the gender? I heard something interesting the other day, and I have to admit I chuckled. In one of these horrible riots that's going on all around the country, a male police officer was arresting a female protester. And as she was about ready to be searched for weapons, she turned around very not very sarcastically, very seriously, said to the police officer, the male police officer, the outdoor plumbing police officer, and said, "I don't want a man to search me. I want a woman to search me." And without blinking an eye, that officer looked at that young lady and said, "How do you know I don't identify myself as a woman?" And he searched her. And it's legal. Because we as a society say you can pick which gender you want to be associated with. And as ridiculous as that may sound, remember, it goes both ways. It will come around to bite you. I may keep my mouth quiet most of the time when it comes to my religious freedoms and when they're impaled. I was okay when you told me 2 weeks ago that I can't meet. You're asking me not to meet as a congregation. And in California, they said, we're not asking, we're telling. You can't. But I'm not going to be okay for it for very long. I can't, I'm sorry. I will not stand by quietly as you treat me with hypocrisy, because I have a God that's different than your God. And you can put your non-God, your evil God, your Satan, your Jezebel spirit, you can put that individual everywhere you want. Monuments, flags. You demand for religious freedom from something that is so destructive to children. But yet you raise the smoking age to 21 because they can't decide on their own whether they're safe or not smoking. But they can decide whether they're a girl or a boy, gay or straight. They can't even decide whether they love Jesus or not. Because if they walk into the government schools, I'm sorry, the public schools, with an I Love Jesus t-shirt on, they're sent home. Because someone, O-N-E, one, will say, you're infringing upon my religious rights. Well, here's the note I'm going to end on this today. You don't have to pay attention to what I say. You don't have to pay attention to what my pastor says, or my church, or my bishop, or my denomination, or my religion. But you know who you're going to have to pay attention to one day? God. Not your God. The God. The God of the Bible. The God, the creator of heaven and earth. The God that created you, that you continually deny. And one day you will stand in judgment before him. And you will pee your pants. And you will drop to your knees and you will beg him for forgiveness. So you can put me down all you want. You can tell me I can't go to church all you want. Because in the end, the God will speak for me. Amen? Amen. God bless us, everyone.